Good evening, and welcome to another video where I catalog the wildlife of a game that I like. This time we'll be covering the alien fauna of Barotrauma, one of my favorite games of all time, where you and a team of players need to pilot a submarine through the deep, murky alien waters of Europa, an icy ocean moon of Jupiter. As a lover of both the deep sea and submarines, I am innately drawn to this premise, and I have since dumped 250,000 hours into this game, and probably twice as much trying to convince other people to play it with me. Today I'll be talking about the various alien beasties that try to tear your submarine to pieces throughout your journey in the submerged caverns of Europa. As usual, I got my Discord server to draw art for each of these entries. The artist's name is in the bottom left, and, should they have a social media account to link, it's linked in the description. If any of the artists' work catch your eye and you want to either follow them or commission them, go and check them out down there. But before we begin, I've got my sponsor segment to get through. Alright, let's do it in like a unique way, okay? So, usually people skip through it. Let's make people not skip through it, okay? So let me do this in like a fun voice. Welcome to basic submarine training, ladies. First lesson, get a goddamn computer. A good submarine can't run without a console, and with the current market, they don't come as one package anymore. So the best manufacturer has gotta be Critical Error Computing. A team of independent PC builders, one of which happens to be a close friend of mine, passionate about the craft, willing to take your money and give you something really worth your dime. Even if you don't need to slap that sumbitch into the mainframe of your submarine's navigation console, I'm sure you'll still get bored in between patching up breaches and gunning down crawlers. And well, any good PC will help that problem easier than anything else I could think of. I've personally lost 4 crew members because I got engrossed into a game of Deadlock while we were being assaulted by mud raptors. I couldn't have run that game without the computer they built me. Can you really blame me for letting those folks get torn apart and eaten? I don't. I don't even think about the screams anymore. Just about the plays I made. God damn, I'm cool. Oh, yeah, right, sorry. Anyway, make sure you buy a computer at criticalerrorcomputing.com/zombies. Good luck, cadets, and remember to keep one headphone ear off at all times to listen in for screaming and gunfire. Phew, okay, there you go. I hope that was entertaining, because it was fun to record. Anyway, let's get started. This list is going to be a bit more unique than the previous ones because unlike in Rainworld, there aren't any direct analogs, for the most part, to describe possible biological clades that each creature could be in because this ecosystem developed entirely separate from anything Earth-related. So we are flying blind. I can't theorize that the crawlers are reptiles because Europa has a completely separate evolutionary tree that only really overlaps with something from our planet like one time, and that one time is really frustrating to think about. So I'll mostly be analyzing the beasts in relation to each other as opposed to any knowledge that we innately have, which will mean a lot more radical speculation. If you care that much about my theories, you can shout at me about them in the comments, or leave your own. It's engagement either way. Nerd break. Warning, we're gonna have a nerd break. I need to nerd out about stuff. We're gonna get into the way that Europa's planetary physics affect its ecosystem, and we're gonna get kind of in depth, so skip 3.5 minutes forwards if you're not interested, but otherwise you should stay. It's all gonna be unscripted. So, spoilers, the plants on Europa, which there are plants by the way, can't photosynthesize. The entire planet is covered in a huge sheet of ice that prevents any and all sunlight from getting down below. Also, it's just far as fuck away. It's way out there. It's around Jupiter. So, all things considered, photosynthesis is off the table, flat out. There's not a lot of plants kicking around on Europa, or actually there are. There's no plants that I talk about in this besides the ballast flora, and that's like a weird parasitic thing. So I don't really think it needs photosynthesis, but it is green. Now, there's a few constants throughout all European plants that make them weird. First off, very few of them are properly vibrantly green. Most of them are some shade of yellowish, brownish, greenish thing, as opposed to just, looking like a earth plant. That's because they can't photosynthesize. And they also don't really have leaves that mostly have fan-like structures, which are probably combing the water. They're all very root-like. So if I had to guess, I would say that all the plants in Europa that you find on the European Ridge, for example, are probably chemovores, working off the numerous hydrothermal vents that show up all throughout the abyssal layers near the bottom of the map. I guarantee you that those plants, which likely serve as the basis for the entire European ecosystem, They almost certainly feed off of the various chemicals let out in the hydrothermal plumes from the vents down at the bottom. Now, I don't know what exactly it would be. If I had to guess, it's probably some mixture of sulfides, methane, and just various different types of oxides and minerals, which can all get, souped up and then eaten by plants. But ultimately, I'm not sure. There's no light in this, so we can't really analyze the color of the plants, or at least I can't because I'm too stupid. If somebody wants to look at them and be like, yeah, sure, this is how they work, I welcome you to do it. And also, I don't know how Europa's actual makeup will affect the hydrothermal vents, because I don't know that. That's not where my expertise lies. I'm more about the animals, and I didn't even go to school for that. I'm just autistic. On the bright side, we do know that Europa has hydrothermal vents, or at least it's highly possible and very likely that it does, which means it has the basis for life, and that's why it's also cool and interesting. But it does not have a lava mantle. I believe it's silicate rock. Don't quote me on that. But it could be, simply due to the tidal heating caused by Jupiter, that there's enough internal warmth to actually create the reactions required to make hydrothermal vents, which would then gush out a bunch of interesting chemicals all into the water. I'm talking too much. Point is, Europa's oceans aren't built off of the reliable photosynthesis of algae like our oceans are. They're built off of a wide-spanning network of hydrothermal vents that feeds a whole network of likely floating planktonic chemovores, as well as the sessile plant-like chemovores that grow along the walls of the European ridge. I just think that's really fucking cool. Anyway, let's move on to the cool guys. Nerd break over. First off, we have the basic bitch enemy of Barotrauma, the Crawler. These guys are the early game enemies. They're fragile and angry, and they show up in packs. Even the basic coil guns will shred them, not to mention how easy it is to blow them away with a simple revolver bullet. There's a lot of different variations of them, but before we get to those, we need to talk about the basic Crawler body plan. They've got a fairly basic silhouette, eerily similar to a mermaid, to the point I genuinely believe they're inspired by the Fiji mermaid specifically. Their bodies are covered in mottled green skin, and they have 8 red eyes poking out from a large bulbous skull, sporting a large fish-like mouth filled with huge teeth. They also have 2 arms, ending in webbed hand-like structures that they use in tandem with their powerful tail to paddle around with. This body plan leaves them eerily similar to humans at a glance, to the point where I genuinely believe they're the closest analog to humans in the European ecosystem. They tend to hunt in packs, as well as being violently cannibalistic, to the point where if one of them dies, the group will just ignore your submarine to consume the body of their fallen comrade. They're ravenous hunters, often eating before they even finish every creature in their line of sight. They're also capable of going on land, though they don't seem quite as well built for it as other creatures on this list. Somewhat often, you'll end up encountering a larger crawler specimen, seemingly leading the pack. This is the Crawler Broodmother, looking like a blown-up crawler with a distended belly, 1 less pair of eyes for some reason, and a weird crown-like structure atop its head. This bitch is huge compared to the normal crawlers that surround her, being many times larger and more dangerous, capable of soaking a notable amount more ammo, and coming with her own new ranged attack where she spits eggs at you. These eggs appear to be either infertile or not developed enough because they don't have anything in them other than sulfuric acid, though you can find them fully fertile and nearly hatched in the nests they build in caves, which contains the recently born and still as angry crawler hatchlings. These guys came out the egg with the hatred of their older selves ingrained as deep as it can go, born to die, world as a fuck, etc., etc. So how does this all link together? Well, I believe that crawlers are pack-hunting, opportunistic predators that rely on numbers to overwhelm large prey. Packs are usually formed of males, but occasionally a female is born, who then quickly becomes a crawler broodmother. Packs of males will gather around her to hunt alongside her in hopes that they can mate with her at some point. When the crawler broodmother has gestated her eggs properly, she will find a large enough cave to lay her eggs in before either leaving the males to guard said nest while she finds a new pack to create a new brood, or simply dying and feeding those males. After a while, the hatchlings will be born and probably need to escape or eat the males guarding them, living in the caves eating small fish until they grow large enough to head out and into the open ocean and continue the life cycle. Moving on from those dudes, we have another of the most common and easily the most popular enemy in the game, mud raptors. These deep-sea, homegrown European bastards will be the end of many a starting expedition due to effectively being a less frequent, significantly beefier crawler. Mud raptors are well known for being homeless and really wanting to squat inside your submarine and raid your fridge, except instead of eating all your leftovers, they're eating the entrails of your assistant, and it's not a fridge, it's that assistant's abdominal cavity. Appearing in packs around 2 to 6 individuals usually, mud raptors are heavily armored amphibious beasts that prowl the open sea looking for prey. They seem to have a body plan similar to a theropod, described by the wiki as a mix between a dinosaur and a shrimp. The armor on their backs does seem to be similar to an arthropod, and judging by their 6 limbs, 4 of which are small, seemingly useless arms, it would be easy to assume that they're from an analogous evolutionary line to arthropods. However, judging by their size, I'd like to imagine that these guys have some sort of interior skeletal structure, and the exoskeleton is merely armor that doesn't really help much with structure, considering unarmored mud raptors can live without any difficulties outside of combat. On that note, we do know exactly what makes up the shell of a mud raptor, hydroxyapatite, which is the primary building material for our bones. Going off of this, we can assume they probably have hydroxyapatite bones in a similar way to us, leaving them possibly closely related to the crawlers with their oddly mammalian or reptilian anatomy in spite of their superficially arthropod-like bodies. Obviously, though, due to basic anatomical differences, I think they're very distant relatives to crawlers if they're even evolutionarily similar at all beyond basic observations. Aside from that, they tend to hunt as coordinated pack predators similar to wolves, using their sharp, powerful beaks to tear open submarine hulls and flesh alike. Similar to the crawlers, they also have large nests built in caves that are defended by adults, though they don't have brood mothers, implying they are a bit more traditional about their mating practices. On the topic of variants, though, there's another, beefier version of mud raptors called veteran mud raptors. These guys are huge. Their armor has grown so thick that it takes on a much paler tan color, as well as forming much larger protrusions along their head and back. This is presumably caused by age, as their name is a mud raptor veteran, implying that they're like this because of how long they've lived, how many battles they've seen. Their size and strength oftentimes ends with them leading entire packs on their own or with another veteran by their side. So my overall theory is that mud raptors are a pack-hunting predator with high intelligence and heavy bone-like armor covering their bodies. This armor forms as the individuals get older, with unarmored individuals likely being juveniles and hatchlings being soft and squishy. The older the individual gets, the thicker the armor gets, perhaps even being fatally cumbersome once they grow to a certain age. But in between those stages comes the mud raptor veterans, powerful elders with thick armor that lead packs on their hunts. In between hunts, mud raptors will lay eggs in caves and guard them until offspring hatch. Before they do hatch, the parent will likely leave out to the open waters to continue their hunting. Okay, now time for the hard one, the mantis. What? This is who I was talking about. This is just a bug, an earth bug, down to everything about it. It's a big lobster with mantis forelimbs. Like, look at this. I'm fairly certain I've eaten this guy at a Cajun restaurant before. Mantises are huge arthropods, or an arthropod analog at least, because look at these guys. They have shrimp-like bodies with pointed heads, articulated thick tails, and 8 legs, 2 of which are modified into bladed forelimbs, akin to the mantids on Earth. They're found more or less exclusively in caves, using their camouflage to blend in with the cave walls, ignoring all distractions until a human swims past them. Upon spotting their prey, they will lunge towards them and inject paralytic venom with their forelimbs before proceeding to kill and eat their prey. Very simple. The main question is, why the hell do they look so much like an Earth creature? There could be a lot of reasons, like the ancients seeding life on Earth as well, but I'll probably just say that it's convergent evolution, 2 different creatures evolving similarly due to similar circumstances. Plus, you know what they say about like evolving into crabs, right? The mantises are just early on the curve. They know what it's about. We're the weird ones. But back to the unusual creatures entirely unique to Europa, the spineling. These guys are closest in analog to, I don't know, maybe a dragonfly, but they're clearly not even close. They're very alien. These eel-like creatures tend to swim about in large numbers, twisting their bodies and launching nearly 2-foot-long harpoons at anything they see. These harpoons are made of carbon and zinc and seem to be capable of shooting through submarine hulls with exceptional ease. They have 12 of these spines along their sides, with a large number more budding from their tails. The interesting thing here is what the hell the spineling even is. The head is just a blank, smooth bulb with no eyes or mouth visible. We can even see them grow to exceptional sizes with the giant spineling, which, even at a larger scale, seems to be equally featureless. If I had to guess, I'd imagine spinelings aren't designed to hunt the type of things their spines are used against. Rather, I imagine they hunt small fish, swallowing them whole with a mouth that is probably hidden to us on their sprite. It could be that spinelings travel along in packs, looking for schools of small fish, or even maybe they filter feed on small planktonic organisms in the water. If we go with this idea, they'd nearly exclusively use their spines to ward off predators that would try to hunt them, making them both hard to bite and dangerous, as with how fast they are, they can easily flank and shank until their predator bleeds to death. If I had to guess how they get around, the spinelings likely echolocate. The sounds they make are a very distinct buzzing noise that could be very easily used to locate small fish in the dark caverns of Europa. Them relying on echolocation could also be why they're so aggressive when they're disturbed. The ship is effectively emitting not only a loud-ass droning engine, but also the exceptionally loud sonar pings that would likely make it a huge annoying target for a group of spinelings to want to remove ASAP so they can stop getting their sensitive noise-receptive organs blasted by military-grade sonar. There are a few spineling variants, though. The most notable is easily the giant spineling. These bastards are absolutely huge, multiple orders of magnitude bigger than their smaller brethren. I do think they're a different species, though. Unlike the crawler broodmother and mudraptor veteran, these guys have notably different body shapes, with a notable lack of tail spikes and a fin at the very tip of the tail, as well as completely different coloration. These guys are found swimming amongst packs of spinelings, so if I had to guess, these larger spinelings serve as shelter for the smaller ones, like small fish following a manta ray for protection. The giants are likely built to skewer the much more dangerous huge predators of Europa, but they'll easily shish kebab your submarine if you let them. There's also another variant of the spineling called the viperling, the only difference being that these guys are green and have morbazine, a deadly neurotoxin which coats their spines. Due to the lack of information on these guys, I'm not sure if they do actually collaborate with their non-venomous kin to attack you, but either way, these guys are clearly a different species, one that simply evolved to make their spines deadlier with the addition of poison. They're a lot rarer though, so it's likely that it's a more recently developed species, or there's some flaw which makes it harder for them to reproduce. Okay, next up is another medium-sized predator, the tiger thresher. These guys are basically crawlers on crack, being long eels covered in tiger stripes, hence the name. Their most notable feature is probably their eyeless head with a mouth filled with long, sharp teeth. These crack eels are known for their ballsiness and deadliness, hunting pretty much anything no matter the weight class and being very proficient at picking off crew members in caves. Getting mauled by one of these guys is bad not only because of how easily they rip you apart, but because even if you do survive, you have to deal with the plethora of infected wounds they'll give you. These guys are a pretty open and shut case in my opinion, hunting around in packs like a seaborne allosaurus, eating whatever they can get their hands on and chasing what they can't. They lay their eggs in nests in caves and have hatchling variants as well, similar to mudraptors and crawlers. Now, something I haven't mentioned yet is that these guys have a big brother, the bone thresher. This huge beast is nearly twice the size of a tiger thresher and covered in thick white plates of bony armor, with a much meaner bite and the temperament to match its appearance. These guys tend to lead tiger thresher swarms, and I'm honestly unsure if they're a relative to the tiger thresher, some sort of weird subspecies, or a morph of them. It could be that the bone threshers are the females and the tiger threshers are the males, or vice versa. Maybe it's something akin to soldier ants, where packs are naturally built around the bone threshers. Maybe the bone threshers are straight up a different species, a close relative that has a symbiotic relationship with the tiger threshers who help cooperate on hunts with it. I'm not really sure. It's just towing that line between plausibly being the same creature with intense dimorphism and being so immensely different that I want to call them different things. So I'm just gonna say that I have no idea. Okay, time to move on to the larger predators. Starting off with the most common, the hammerhead. These oddly shaped fish-like creatures can be found roaming alone or in small packs, hunting for potential prey. Their bodies are long and covered in deep red fins, as well as 2 pairs of claw-like limbs emerging from either side of their body. Their head is their namesake, with it terminating in a wide, flat surface tinged a very distinct deep red. Similar to the spinelings, they don't appear to have a readily available mouth, sporting only 2 pairs of eyes as their sole head feature. As expected of their name, their primary hunting strategy involves using their head as a hammer to beat the hell out of whatever they usually hunt. Judging by their blunt force trauma-focused strategy, I'd imagine their prey is probably shelled, as they seem incredibly adept at punching through submarine hulls. Interestingly, they don't apply bite wounds with their melee attack against characters. Rather, their claw attack only cuts people up traditionally, which implies they don't have a mouth capable of biting. According to the wiki, they have a mouth in some promotional material, but I cannot for the life of me find that promotional material, and trust me, I did look. So if anyone has that promotional material mentioned with the elusive hammerhead mouth, send it to me and I'll link it in a pinned comment. For now, I just have to assume that they probably have a mouth, so running with this theory, hammerheads are a carnivorous, shark-like species that use their heads to bludgeon anything smaller than them, capable of easily smashing through the armor of mud raptors, bone threshers, and maybe even molochs. They then use their claws to shred whatever flesh is keeping their prey alive, before feeding with a comically small mouth. They do have some variants I should point out though. Probably the most puzzling is the golden hammerhead. These guys are very odd, being faster, tougher, yet more skittish hammerheads with a very distinctive color scheme. If I had to guess, these guys are just an odd subspecies or a genetic mutation similar to albinism on Earth. Goldism. Oricism. That's a good-ass name for it. Just because I thought of that name, I'm running with the golden hammerhead being hammerheads because they just have a case of oricism. The much more interesting hammerheads here are the hammerhead matriarch and the hammerhead spawn. The hammerhead spawn are easy, they're baby hammerheads, but the matriarch is where shit gets weird. This big lady is huge compared to her smaller kin, with her body being an almost completely different shape entirely. She gains a skirt of tendrils, larger fins, 1 extra pair of eyes for some reason, and of course her big bulbous head. This head no longer functions as a hard ramming surface, but instead as a container for eggs. Now this is almost certainly a similar situation to the crawler broodmother, a morph of hammerhead that is born different and swells up to a huge size, mating with multiple males and gestating a large clutch of eggs, being guarded by those males until the eggs have hatched. The matriarch is relatively docile, but when provoked has a deadly special attribute. Upon ramming its head into the submarine, it will explode and kill the matriarch, but release 30 hammerhead spawn into the water. These carnivorous little bastards will promptly enter your submarine through the hole blasted into it by their late mother, and proceed to feast on your crew as their first buffet. Now, why this happens is confusing, but possibly explainable. It could be that this suicide attack done by the matriarch is a way to ensure that her young get that first meal. If she were to dump this attack onto a moloch, for example, it would surely shatter the armor and massively damage the animal. This would then allow her young to finish it off and get a wonderful meal to go along with the mother's body as a dessert. Now this does have holes in it. Notably, the hammerhead matriarch is not aggressive towards anything other than submarines, and even then won't actively target them unless her life is threatened. So maybe this suicide attack is a maneuver saved just for us, but I struggle to believe that because it wouldn't make a lot of sense for an entire species to evolve just around killing humans who, if I recall correctly, showed up like 50 years ago. Or almost certainly more than that, but my point still stands. Okay, moving on. I mentioned molochs in the last entry, why not talk about them some more? Molochs are a huge shelled mollusk-like creature that act similarly to a large, angry whale. They tend to roam around the wider open areas of the European Ocean, letting out loud sounds similar to a whale song. Their body plans are simple, built around a large ballast sac for moving up and down, with tendrils extending downwards and a large shell-like armor plate protecting it from damage. Anatomy-wise, they're fairly simple, if unusual, looking like a huge invertebrate. But they might have bones, actually. Well, I mean, we know they do because there's an item in the game called a Moloch bone, so it could be that the ballast sac just has some internal structures like ribs or a spine, or the more likely option that the tendrils have segmented bones like long fingers, which is only mildly disturbing. Now for the Moloch's behaviors, though. They tend to not have a hunting response, straight up ignoring solo divers, only retaliating when attacked but not retaining aggro for a while once left alone. The thing that causes these guys to be huge threats is their noise sensitivity. The sonar of the submarine agitates a lot of your open wildlife, but these guys hate it more than anything. The moment you use a loud sonar pulse near them, they are on you until you're dead or you run far enough away. There's one other way to piss off a Moloch, though, outside of attacking it or using the sonar near it, and that's attacking the baby Molochs you can find around the caves. These cute little blobs are underdeveloped Molochs. Their shells are translucent and thin, their tendrils are short, and their entire body is a bright pink color. Aw, how adorable. Whenever these babies are hurt in any way, they'll release a call that other Moloch babies nearby will mimic, which is likely to call their mother to help defend them, because she will do just that and make you regret ever touching her kids. Now, as to why the Molochs are angry at the submarine sonar in general, though, I have two pretty solid theories. The first idea is that they hate the sonar because their bodies are made to sense through sound. They have finely tuned ears that get blasted by the sonar and trigger the Moloch to turn aggressive. The second idea is that they use their whale song-like calls to broadcast that this territory belongs to them, and they see the submarine as another Moloch trying to impose on their territory when the submarine starts making loud sounds too, so they duke it out with the submarine like it was an intruding other member of their species trying to challenge them for their territory. I think I prefer the second one because it's a little cooler, and as far as I'm aware, we only ever see Molochs on their own, which lends credence to the idea that they're solitary, territory-holding creatures. Outside of that, though, there is another Moloch variant called the Black Moloch. These guys are basically just stronger Molochs, outside of a small difference. Their ram attack has a slight EMP effect. Now, I have no idea how to explain this scientifically. Maybe the Moloch's calls will affect electromagnetism in some weird way. Maybe they have a similar electromagnetic receiving organ to sharks that can occasionally release a weak electromagnetic pulse when jostled by their ram attack. I'm not sure. Outside of that, though, I just think the Black Moloch is a bigger, scarier Moloch species. Either that or a Moloch that's grown so old that its shell has hardened and turned black over time, and also they became an electric wizard for some reason. Next up is easily my favorite creature, and the one that I used as pretty heavy inspiration for a monster design in one of my other videos. You should watch Lethal Company Concepts, by the way. I'm really proud of that series. Anyways, the Watcher. This big, spiky dude is the first beast we've seen thus far to make use of something very similar to magic. Now, I don't believe it's actually magic, but it's definitely getting there. The Watcher is a huge spherical organism with a spiky black shell upon its back, making the entire thing kind of look like a big black sweet gum seed. Two pairs of flippers adorn the sides of the creature, and right smack dab on the front is its namesake, a huge blood-red eyeball that it uses to do its signature watching. We know a few things about the makeup of this creature. First off, most creatures in this game drop alien blood. Watchers don't. They drop sulfuric acid. This is doubled down on by having their acidic blood actually be a threat that you have to watch out for in-game. Whenever you shoot them, they let out a cloud of their blood into the water that eats through even ship hulls with frightening efficacy. They also drop a fragment of their shells on death, which is the first item we find that is made of fictional material, Dementonite. Apparently, this Dementonite is a metal with more than 3 spatial dimensions, which drives people crazy and apparently makes a really good screwdriver. Point is, it's laced into the Watcher's shell, and that's really weird, but we have one creature we're aware of that puts metal into their carapaces, the scaly foot snail, so there's technically precedent? To be fair, we also don't have precedent for 20-foot wide sea monsters with acidic blood, so maybe it's just a weird thing unique to Europa. Now onto their main gimmick. Watchers don't attack you at all, they just watch you. Now it sucks that they really like driving you insane. Maybe it's all that fourth dimensional metal in their shells, but just being looked at by one ramps up your psychosis real quick. It also buffs the shit out of every creature nearby, causing your submarine filled with recently christened lunatics to experience a pretty bad Saturday night. There's not a lot of scientific precedent for this, but it could be that rather than their actual gaze of the Watcher being the issue, it's the frequency that they let out. Whenever the Watcher gets close enough, you can hear a low, drumming, staticky sound. So it could be releasing some sort of odd wavelength that interferes with human brainwaves and messes up our heads, as well as putting all nearby predators into a frenzy-like state that causes them to maul people or each other to death. It could be that the Watcher feeds on the viscera left behind by predators inflicted with that frenzy. Or it just filter feeds on planktonic organisms and does the frenzy thing to troll people. Okay, now for a real doozy, the husk infection. This parasite is fairly ubiquitous around the game, and you find it in multiple different areas. So let's go over how it actually shows up. The first creature you'll probably find bearing signs of this parasite is the simply named husk, or human husk to be more accurate. This is a human diver completely taken over by the husk parasite, with its chitinous appendages extending from where the mouth would be. The parasite itself seems to rest somewhere inside the chest cavity, canonically hollowing out the body and using what is likely an ovipositor stabbing out from the mouth to inject eggs into new hosts. The parasite itself seems to grant the host unnatural strength and durability, allowing them to regenerate from all non-fatal wounds in a matter of seconds, surviving the crushing pressure of Europa's oceans without a suit, and move with increased speed both in water and on land. The nature of the parasite itself seems similar to an arthropod, with chitinous appendages flailing about and with them evoking imagery of tongue-eating lice and such. So it could be that the actual body of the parasite itself is just probably some sort of crustacean-adjacent thing that rests inside the neck and chest cavity of the host, growing larger and consuming the host as it does so, hollowing them out into a husk. Now back to the actual infection itself, though. A human first finds signs of infection shortly after getting injected with eggs by a crazed cultist, medical doctor, or optionally a husk ovipositor. These symptoms appear as muscle aches, throat soreness, feverishness, and of course something being caught in your throat. This thing in question is the husk's limb, which will then burst out of your mouth and start stabbing people indiscriminately. The only way to treat it is calixinide, which we learn through some auxiliary lore, only actually places the husk into a dormant state rather than causing it to vanish properly, which is mildly disturbing. We can also see other husked things, most notably the husked crawler, which is a crawler infected with the husk parasite. These guys don't hunt for food, their bodies are emaciated and rotting, and they don't have any apparent survival instincts. They constantly regenerate akin to a husked human as well. The fact that the husk is only able to infect crawlers and humans could imply that the reason as to why they can infect humans in the first place is because they first evolved to infect crawlers. Crawlers already have very similar features to humans, with a humanoid head, hands, and sinewy skin, so it could be that this is a similar thing to how diseases jump from apes to humans, though a much wider leap, clearly. The husk parasite seems to have absolutely loved the jump, though, as there are a lot more types of husked human than there are husked crawlers. There's the husk exosuit, which is a husked human in an exosuit, a husk prowler, a much faster variant with longer appendages extending from its chest and back, and the husk chimera. What the fuck is the husk chimera? Well, first off, we need to talk about the Church of the Husk. This is one of the factions you can interact with during a campaign. They're a cult of husk worshippers trying to merge humanity with the husk parasite for the sake of evolution and transcendence and all that shit. As far as I'm aware, they made the husk chimera, which means it's not at all naturally occurring, and considering it seems to be some horrible mixture between a mantis, a spineling, and a human, all bristling with husk limbs, it's probably a good thing that this isn't the fault of evolution. Still, the fruit of human creativity over here still is very dangerous, moving about with remarkable efficiency in spite of its horrible form. So it's likely the husk, or husks, that are controlling this thing can be blamed for keeping the thing together. It could also be that the chimera is held together with some sort of horrible genetic modification, but something tells me the husk is the reason this otherwise very dead monstrosity can still move and hold itself together. Overall, the husk parasite is a constant force throughout Europa. Be vigilant when exploring wrecks, and make sure you're never short on Calixonide, and you should be okay. Also, for all those new doctors out there, make sure you don't accidentally inject your husk-infected captain with cyanide. It's Calixonide. I know it's easy to confuse for all the dyslexics in the audience, but I'm saying this as somebody who has been lethally poisoned in this manner. Take a second cursory glance over that name. You'll thank me later. Alright, one more doozy. This one's more of a game mechanic than a direct creature, but it's the ballast flora and the thalamus. They're the same thing. Starting out with the ballast flora, these plant-like growths spawn in clouds of spores around the more verdant cave systems. Upon being sucked up by a submarine's ballast pump, they begin to grow around the pump, extending vines and bulbs that form a web along the walls of the submarine, affecting pumps, junction boxes, and doors. Ballast flora usually needs to be burned off before it can devour the entire submarine and turn it into an inhospitable mess of acidic foliage. The main threat it poses when not dealt with is to the junction boxes. It'll drain power, presumably to fuel its own growth, causing a huge strain on the submarine's power grid. Heat and fire are the main ways to deal with it. Once you take it out at the root, the rest of the infestation dies. However, once the infestation is attacked, it does begin to counter. Infested pumps flood the rooms they're in, infested doors shut, and infested walls spit out acidic smog that burns attackers. Leave this alone for long enough, and at least in lore, you'll end up with a thalamus. A thalamus is a huge system of ballast flora that has completely taken over the wreck of a submarine. It's capable of puppeting all of the submarine's systems as well, most notably the weapons. The thalamus uses a fleshy harpoon to reel in submarines before firing on them with the submarine's turrets and injecting terminal cells through the flesh spike. These terminal cells are small algae-like creatures that attempt to kill all crew members on the submarine. The thalamus itself seems to mimic a body, using the submarine itself as an exoskeleton as the flora inside forms organs, namely the basic nondescript organ, which doesn't do much besides store important biological material, the flesh gun, which contains the harpoon, the flesh spike, which will inject terminal cells into the submarines that it can poke, the cell spawner, which spawns leukocytes, versions of the terminal cells that protect the thalamus as a sort of immune system, and finally the brain, which controls the thalamus itself. The goal of the thalamus is clearly to spread itself through the submarines that it catches. Now, we don't actually find multi-wreck thalamuses, but we have to assume that's why, otherwise it's just killing them for fun. So let's theorize a life cycle. An adult thalamus will regularly spit out clouds of spores throughout the cave systems they inhabit. These spores will then remain dormant for God knows how long until a submarine sucks them up into the ballast. After that, the ballast flora will take over and consume the submarine, turning it into a thalamus that will then continue the life cycle. The thalamus will use their flesh guns to launch harpoons at submarines to propagate and feed simultaneously. Now for the big question, for all the marbles. Why did they evolve to fill this niche? Humans have only been colonizing Europa for a good few decades, if not centuries, not long enough for something to evolve specifically to hunt our modern-era submarines. Which means they must have this behavior of infesting a ballast-like thing for a while beforehand. I wonder what other creatures exist that are a similar size to a submarine, are heavily armored, have a specific organ named after a ballast, and have existed on Europa before humans did. Huh. I wonder if it's the ever-present filter-feeding sack of nutrients, the Moloch. Yes, indeed, my faithful and attentive audience whom I am oh so thankful for. I believe the thalamus was designed to infest and turn Molochs into the equivalent of the infested wrecks we find in-game. Unfortunately, there's no game evidence for this, but I think it's a kick-ass fucking theory, and so I'm sticking by it, and I'm gonna shout it from the rooftops because I really think this is the coolest fucking thing I've ever come up with. This is so rad. Anyways, time for what everyone and their mother has been waiting for, the abyssal creatures. Starting with the Latcher. These huge beasts, like the other abyssal creatures, can only be found in the deepest waters of Europa's oceans. Its main body consists of a large rounded head with a wide open mouth filled with needle-like teeth, each one many times longer than an entire human body. The hairy central head also sports a multitude of piercing green eyes, as well as a pulsing sac of, presumably, organs. 4 legs sprout off from this head, used to swim and presumably to hold on to the few open rock faces found out in the depths. The Latcher's namesake comes from its ability to latch onto things, namely your submarine. It has a long, sticky tongue that it uses like a tether to pull your submarine out of position, preventing you from doing the ever-so-common strategy of shoving yourself against a rocky nook and just blasting the bitch while your ship floods. The Latcher can be observed feeding on corpses that fall into the abyss, so it's likely an opportunistic hunter, eating not only whatever fresh prey it can find, but also any dead prey that falls down. Considering it goes out of its way to actively eat something as small as a human, it's clearly very ravenous. The mouth is clearly designed for much bigger prey than humans, as it can eat anything smaller than a hammerhead in one single bite, with larger prey taking more chomps to fully consume. This mouth also hides another secret. It can launch out its teeth in a shotgun-like pattern, likely a desperation move, as it only does it when it starts to take damage. These creatures are very mysterious, so for this one as well as the other creatures found down here, it's mostly headcanon. So let me tell you about my unfounded theory about the life cycle of the Latcher. Baby Latchers are born on bits of floating rock in the abyss, born from clutches of eggs laid against the walls of the rock by their now long since absent mother. While on this rock, they consume whatever they can find, including each other, until they grow large enough to brave the open waters. From here on out, anything is fair game. Consume what you can and claim what hunting grounds you can. Latchers are incredibly aggressive on sight, with no warning before they attack, so we can translate this behavior in-game into what is likely an incredibly aggressive, ravenous, and territorial creature. Small Latchers have a myriad of threats to avoid, namely, larger Latchers. They only manage to survive these encounters through superior agility. If 2 Latchers want the same territory, they will fight. The loser is consumed. If a male Latcher meets a female Latcher, they will briefly pause to mate before occasionally fighting to the death afterwards, in which the exhausted male will often lose and feed the female, or they will leave. The female will carry the eggs as they gestate, after which she will find a rocky outcrop and lay her clutch of eggs there. Then she will leave. If she stayed, then she would just consume her hatchlings. Her instincts tell her to leave the rock. Then the beautiful life cycle starts all over again. Judging by how aggressive the Latchers are, how uncommon they are with such huge swaths of territory, I'm decently confident in a lot of these ideas being somewhat accurate, but it is still headcanon, as all of these abyssal creatures' life cycles are gonna be. Anyways, next up is the Charybdis. These astonishingly alien beasts look more like the cover of a death metal album than something you'd find swimming nearby. These creatures appear like a long eel covered in black tentacles with a spear-like tail tip. Their heads appear a dull gray, almost metallic, with their mouths seemingly being colored a crimson red, unless every single Charybdis we see in-game just came from eating a nice big bloody meal. According to the wiki, they're blind. Not mechanically, but judging by the fact that they're attracted to the submarine sonar, it could be that they primarily see through echolocation. Their eyes are very small, after all. Appearance-wise, these guys are weird. They're the closest thing to a proper movie monster in the game, in my opinion. They don't really have an analog to anything except for maybe the bone threshers. Their bodies are super extra, with a lot of features that seem to just be there for the sake of making the design scarier than actual biological purpose. Like, what's up with the spear tail tip? They do drop titanite, so it could be that they literally have a sharp metal spear at the tip of their tail, but it's still confusing. On the other side, though, the Charybdis is very quick thanks to that eel-like body plan they've got, and besides the weirdness of their appearance, they're very simple. They're a big eel that bites your ship. It's likely they just want to hunt us because they assume that we're a Moloch, with us screaming like a Moloch does and all that. Interestingly, they circle like a shark before they attack, unlike the Latcher. As for the life cycle, ahem. Young Charybdis are born in huge clutches of upwards to 1 million tiny eggs that are released into the open water by their mothers. Most of these eggs will be snatched up by predators, many more will be consumed after they hatch. A lucky few will grow into a juvenile Charybdis, consuming everything as they grow nearly unstoppable. Once they grow large enough, they descend back into the abyss to carve out their own hunting grounds. These analytical, intelligent beasts tend to not run into each other very often, usually attacking and killing Molochs, hammerheads, and young Latchers. They will circle and stare for a bit before they decide to attack, and if they do encounter one another, they will often attempt to roar at each other for a bit to scare the other one off. If this doesn't work, a quick and brutal fight will leave the loser wounded and fleeing, and the winner with his territory intact. Some of these meetings will end with mating instead, should the individuals be of opposite sex and, interested. And then the life cycle restarts. Such is the beauty of nature. Alright, one last abyss creature. The most terrifying creature, arguably, in Europa's oceans, the endworm. These gargantuan worms are the biggest and most destructive thing you can run into on a mission. Oftentimes longer than your entire submarine, endworms are covered head to toe in stone-like armor plates made of a fantasy material called physicorium, which doesn't have as cool of an explanation as dementonite, but it's still alien metal, so that's cool. The mouth of the endworm has 2 huge mandibles that can easily crunch through a submarine hull, as well as a much more fragile proper mouth with a ring of teeth surrounding it. These creatures emit rumbling roars that can be seen on the sonar before they attack. Judging by the lack of eyes, they could just absolutely be traditionally blind, relying entirely on the sound from these roars to find their prey. They likely hunt just about anything, with only Charybdis being able to flee them once they're found. They seem to hunt in a rather reserved manner, circling and lunging in to attack before running off again to wait for another perfect opportunity to tear a new fresh wound in their prey. I assume a creature of this strength and size is probably rather vulnerable as a youngling, so let's go over that. Endworms reproduce simply and similarly to Charybdis. They just kinda let it out there as they swim. Females release eggs, males release sperm. When the two meet by random chance, they fertilize the egg. This may sound unrealistic, but this is literally how bobbit worms, the inspiration for the endworms, do it. Young endworms are incredibly vulnerable as they haven't grown their armor yet. They stay vulnerable for a long time. Once they're old enough, they begin to seek out physicorium outcroppings and shave away at them with their jaws to get the minerals needed to grow their shells. After a long enough time of growing, they become an adult endworm. And after even longer, they become a doomworm. Yeah, right, there's another variant of these guys. Well, not really. It's just a bigger endworm, but still. These are likely just bigger, scarier, older endworms, being noticeably larger than the traditional endworm. This is inarguably the scariest thing you can find out in the ocean. Besides that, though, this creature is just incredibly unusual, the most colossal, terrifying thing you can find down here, and it's just kind of a movie monster, really. Unfortunately, we don't really get to see a lot of the abyssal monsters. It makes sense, fear of the unknown, don't show your monster, it stops being scary, but still, a Latcher nest would have been cool. But let's move on to our last category. I know I usually end these on the biggest, scariest guy available, but not this time. We have other things to explain, namely, the Ancients. Yeah, this game has a race of ancient aliens that are called the Ancients. Very creative. The Ancients are primarily seen in the game through their ruins. These ruins are a rare and very dangerous objective, but they have their own creatures to deal with. First off, let's explain the actual ancients themselves. They only show up like once in the final boss fight. Now, finding lore for this game is harder than you would think, considering it's a decently popular game, so most of my information is coming from the YouTube channel Hailstone and this one Reddit post. I mean, I still need to talk about the final boss, so I kinda have to go into the lore a little. We'll get to it. Anyways, the Ancients. These long, mermaid-like dudes have very little distinction between what is machine on them and what is flesh, so I'm just gonna assume it's somewhere in the middle. Their bodies are formed of a head, a long tail, and 2 long limbs. Their head is clearly a very swollen cranial cavity, which they can utilize to talk to us in our brains. Yep, they just have telepathy. They seem very reclusive, their civilization having degraded over time due to the final boss. I'll explain more about that later. They seem to be living in their own ruins, waiting for somebody to help them with their final boss-shaped problem. They had a language that has actually been decoded, and they were very technologically advanced. Biology-wise, I'm so unsure. They seem very similar to the Crawlers in body plan, which might say something about either the Crawlers or the Ancients, but I'm not smart enough to know what it is. So I'll talk more about the actual civilization and the lore when I talk about the final boss, but first we gotta talk about the actual ruins. The first and smallest denizen of the alien ruins is the Swarm Feeder. These aggressive little leech-like goobers attack in, as predicted, swarms. Similar to leeches, they feed through draining blood from a host, which can quickly get deadly with enough swarm feeders present. Their body is composed of a large magenta orb with 4 sharp appendages emerging from it. The 2 in the middle are likely the teeth, whereas the 2 near the ends are likely for locomotion. They seem to emerge from the vents in the alien ruins. Judging by their omnipresence in this location, I cannot imagine they just squatted in them. I imagine this is some sort of auxiliary defense created by the Ancients to protect their technology. These guys likely feed off anything that wanders in, acting as a passive defense without having to activate the big guys. Speaking of the big guys, the Fractal Guardians are next. These fully mechanical automatons rest in stasis pods until an intruder enters. Upon being awoken, they make up for their name by guarding the ruins. Using an array of deadly weapons ranging from harpoons to spike shooters to steam cannons to EMP blasts to giant jets of radioactive alien fire. Yeah, these guys aren't fun to deal with. They'll attack anything and everything except husks and swarm feeders that enter the ruins. Whenever they get low, they head back to their stasis pods to recover. Biologically, there's not a lot going on here. They're robots made of ancient alien technology that we have no real-life basis for. Judging by their acute weakness to EMP blasts, it's likely they don't really have anything biological in that empty head of theirs. Or at least if they do, it's entirely non-functional without the robot bits controlling it. I wish I had more to say regarding these guys and the swarm feeders, but they're literally just weird cyborg genetic freak creations of the Ancients made to guard their homes from would-be squatters. On the other hand, there is a much more interesting cyborg that does exist in the game, and it shows up right near the end. The aptly named cyborg worm is a modified endworm. It's significantly shorter, implying it's been circumcised. I'm joking, but it has clearly been chopped down to size a bit, and is now bristling with jagged outcrops of alien tech, as well as turrets that it uses to shoot you with. In spite of how dangerous this guy is, he's also very simple. He's a modified endworm enslaved by the Ancients to serve as their watchdog, and he does a pretty good job. Bro absolutely wipes you if you don't have the right equipment. Considering he guards the Ancients' biggest, most importantest temple, he's probably the scariest thing made by the Ancients. Well, the second scariest thing made by the Ancients, because it's time to talk about that suspiciously final boss-shaped elephant in the room. And his name is Jove, or Yahweh in ancient speak. This suspiciously chill-looking fellow resides deep within the depths of the Eye of Europa. Let me give you a quick lore tidbit before I get into the shallow puddle that is what we know about this guy biologically. A long while ago, the Ancients resided on Europa. They were a bustling underwater society that subjugated the harsh oceans to their will. That is, until one day they decided to build something. Described as Yahweh, they made a god from their own hands, biological and alive. It was given power over space, as we can see this thing manipulate and create portals during the fight with it. Some way and somehow it began to sing, emitting a frequency or something like that, which enraptured and entranced the ancients. Their civilization fell as they all worshipped their newly created god. This song can actually be heard throughout the game. Jove emits ringing frequencies as it takes damage and sits around, which can, according to the wiki, be heard in some songs in the game. Jove itself sits in the center of the Eye of Europa and doesn't really do a lot but spawn guardians and shoot you with bullets. Once it dies, its singing stops. The ancients seem to be grateful for this, and the ship gets sucked into a wormhole before getting spat out at the start of the campaign. I won't recount the entire theory to you, but more or less the idea is that we, as the crew of the vessel that took down Jove, are sent back in time, still with all of our scars and cuts and spent ammunition, but the world we left behind was able to move forwards without us. I'm not qualified to theorize about the end of the game, but as far as I'm concerned, Jove's song was keeping the ancients enthralled and inactive, as well as being responsible for the gravitational anomaly affecting Europa that caused us to set out on the journey that is the campaign to begin with. And now that we killed it, things are better. Yippee. Biologically speaking, Jove is almost certainly not a robotic entity. With no vulnerability to EMPs, this thing is so far outside the realm of understanding for us as a species that it's kind of all I can say. It's an evil alien god made by aliens, and it can do evil alien god shit like let out an evil alien god song and do stuff with portals. Sound good? Cool. But with that all said and done, I hope you enjoyed this video. As usual, this video was voted for by my patrons. Love you guys. I'm posting a lot about a project I've been making, assuming it isn't out yet, so if you're curious, go ahead and check out over there to see if you're interested. Now that this video is out, I should have a poll up for what my next big video is going to be. Speaking of my patrons though, that's right, it's time for me to show off my bod. My board of official Das Zombers. Thank you again, Beppel, Splashpaws, and Wobble Obble. But that's enough shameless plugging. If you've made it this far and even stayed through my Patreon plug, thank you so much. Your support really means a lot, even if it's just paying attention to me. I'm a YouTuber, I thrive off that shit. I need attention more than air and water. The new direction I'm taking this channel has been admittedly tough, but I'm hoping it'll be worth it in the long run. Let me know if you enjoyed the video, check out the poll to decide what comes next, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.